I'm going to call this podcast episode Goodbye to the Old Me. It's time to start embracing transformation and growth. Sometimes when you go through different seasons in life, I really believe that there's a stage we go through where we have to say goodbye to our old selves. That's one of the stages that I just went through recently, to be honest with you. I spend time at the end of the year really reflecting on the entire year, the good, the bad, things I'm proud of that I did, things I'm not so proud of, looking through decisions I made, how did I view myself. And I didn't realize this is one of the first times that I realized that there's a healing process you have to go through when you let go of that older version of yourself, because I'm not that same person anymore. I'm not the same person that I was last year. And everything about my life, my environment has changed because I've changed. And so I actually spent some time to get away on my own personal, you can call it retreat, my own personal getaway. And in that time, and I've never done this before, there's never been a time in life where I was gone, even on New Year's Eve. I've always been with my family New Year's Eve. And this is one of the first times where I said to my family, I said, I've got to make sure that I'm away and I have some alone time. So I literally booked a hotel and went away off by myself for a while. And I spent time just sitting before God and evaluating my life. Now, and I have to be honest, reading books as well. I have about 9 books that I've read, and I'm on my second or third time going through these books on mindset, books on leadership, books on self-growth. But anyway, really spent some time just sitting and saying goodbye to this old person that I was and embracing this new transformation journey that God has me on. And I didn't realize that even the way I saw myself, even my self-image, that there were some things that I was like, oh my goodness, God is really calling me into a greater leadership role. But I've been in some ways timid of moving forward because I haven't seen the clear vision that God has for me. And so I had to go through this entire process, and it took a long time. It actually probably, I would say it took me almost a good 2.5 or so weeks of just being stuck going through this process of, my mama used to always tell me that I'm a lion. She used to always say that. She used to always say, baby, you are a lion. And so as I began to read through that more and understand what that means, it's as if God began to open my eyes and help me to see that I've called you for so much greater. So when I read through stories in Genesis 1, and I'm going to read through that in the second part of this episode. This is going to be a 2-part episode, by the way. This first part is on really saying goodbye to the old you, and the second part is going to be about really embracing leadership. So I'm going to not go to Genesis right now. I'm going to focus on Romans 12. But anyway, the point I'm getting at is that we have to go through this stage of really being truthful with looking at ourselves and seeing who we are. Like really being truthful. What do we really think about ourselves? There are a number of great philosophers, authors, ministers, a number of people, and I was going to attribute this to one person, but there's so many people that said it, I thought, okay, I won't even say names because so many people have said this phrase. But the phrase is, you are exactly who you think you are. You are exactly who you think you are. And that's what shows up even in your results. You're exactly who you think you are. So what you thought that you would get, that's what you actually end up getting. You're exactly who you think you are. When you show up, even though sometimes we can kind of fake it, right? You can kind of show up and kind of fake it that you're this other person, or you can kind of fake the confidence or whatever. People can pick up on that energy. People can pick up on authenticity, right? And so you end up getting the results back that reflect really who you really are. And that's why it's important that we spend some time thinking through, how do I really see myself? When I had the most recent workshop session inside of the Unlocking Greatness community, and by the way, I'll talk about that a little bit later, because one of the revelations that I'm so glad that God gave this to me is the entire Unlocking Greatness community is being transformed like you wouldn't believe. The messaging, just about everything about the community is now all about Unlocking Greatness community as a community of leaders. People who are looking to rise up in leadership, not just in business, but that's a huge part of it, entrepreneur growth, but just ruling over the assignments that God has given you. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the second part of this podcast episode. But anyway, when I had my most recent workshop, I did something a little unique this time. I brought everyone together, those who were seeking just primarily personal development, those who are seeking entrepreneur development, and even those who are part of I have like an inner circle, almost like a mastermind group. I had everyone come together, and I had everyone sit and literally write and think through last year. And I had them literally write out what are all the things about last year that they liked, but what are all the areas in their lives that they want to see better results. And I had them think through, how do you really, really, really see yourself? And I had them write that out. What do you really think about yourself, the way when you value your self-worth, when you look at your self-esteem, when you look at the way that you make decisions, when you look at the way that you show up, the way that you even take care of yourself? And I had people just write out all of those areas that they had some concerns with, or areas that they were not that happy with, the areas they want to grow in. And then I taught them a little bit about, and there's many universal laws out there. One of the laws is the law of polarity, which means there's an opposite of everything. There's hot, cold, up, down. You guys can look that up on your own, but that's a very basic universal law. But inside of every situation, there's always, and I've talked about this in my book, Necessary, there's always gold to dig for. Some people say that there's a seed inside of every negative situation. I like to say that there's gold inside of it if you're willing to dig for it and look it up. If you're willing to dig for it and pull it out. And so I had them write down their list of all of those areas that they were not happy with. And keep in mind, I went through the same process myself. When I got away for a while and went out on my own, whatever you want to call it, sabbatical or hiatus or whatever name you want to give it, this is what I went through. You write down all of those areas of concern and areas that you just are, in some areas, and I'm just being very transparent, in some areas I was like feeling embarrassed by decisions I made, or ashamed of some of the decisions I made, or feeling this, and I literally wrote it all out. And then I had them sit down and write the exact opposite, right? The exact opposite of of that situation. So, for example, if you find yourself being a very indecisive person, right? And if you look at your year from last year and you're saying that you were very indecisive, so you write down on the other side of the paper that you are that you're very decisive now. So that's a part of it's a statement that I have them put together. It's called a finally statement. So, for example, let me slow down so this makes some sense. So, for example, you're saying, finally, I'm very decisive. And when I make decisions, I stick with those decisions, and I'm very slow to change those decisions unless I seek counsel and get advice to make sure that it makes sense to change it. Does that make sense? Or let's say you struggle with being distracted all the time. So you're writing on the opposite side of that paper, finally, I'm steadfast, not only in my mind, but in my spirit. Right? I'm not easily distracted. I have healthy boundaries in place so that I stay on track with my goals. Or let's say you're having some financial issues. You're not happy with how your finances came out last year. You're not happy with your numbers or whatever. You write on the opposite side of that paper, finally, you get my point? So finally, all my bills are paid in full. Does that make sense? Finally, I'm debt free. Finally, I'm investing and I have assets to store for my family for generations to come. So you get my point? So I had them write on the opposite side all of those polar opposites of what they did not want. And there's a whole process we went through. I'm just trying my best to go through this as quickly as possible. But we went through an entire process with that. But bottom line is, when it was all said and done, what I said for them to do is I said, now you guys don't have to do this, but I surely did. So of course, after praying and after we went through some mindset exercises and coaching and all of that, and they just absolutely loved it. But then I told them, I says, I highly recommend that this old version of who you were, when you hold this list up and you look at it, and this is what I did. I said to myself, I'm no longer this person anymore. I'm letting you go. I'm letting you go. And you don't get to rule over me, and my new results are not going to be based on who I was in the past. I'm letting you go. And I didn't realize that there's such a healing process you have to go through when you let go. It's almost like saying goodbye to me. I didn't realize it. I was sleeping, like it was like 2-3 days in a row. I was just like sleeping more, not sleeping 2-3 days continuously, but I was tired. I was a little drained in my spirit, and I didn't realize it. It was almost like a birthing process. It was literally, I felt like it was literally a birthing process of, oh my goodness, it's almost like I'm giving birth to like a new version of myself. Does that make sense? It was as if I was just going through labor. That's probably a better way of putting it, right? And I remember going before God. I remember saying to Jesus, I remember saying, and I won't go through details, but I was literally like holding up this sheet of paper, and I was saying, God, here's who I was. Here are the areas in my life where I want to change. Help me to grow in these areas. direct me. And, there's a number of things that I said. And I handed it over and I literally put it in Jesus' hand. This is what I did in the spirit, just in my mind. I just pictured me just handing it over. And I just pictured him getting that sheet of paper with all of the stuff on there that I don't like about me, right? All of that stuff. And just literally, I felt in my spirit, and I saw this sort of like a vision in my spirit. He just impressed it into his chest. Like I've taken on all of your pain. I've taken on all of your shame or all of your embarrassment or all of your mistakes. When I put you here, I knew that you were going to go through these stages, but I still love you. I'm still here. And I want you to see your value through my eyes. And I sat there and I cried. It was the most beautiful crying that I think I've ever done in my life. Because sometimes we can be held to our past, you guys, by being stuck in here's who we are or who we continue to be, or why don't I ever do better in this particular area of my life, right? And I know that I'm my worst critic. Some people have told me that. They say, Z, you're more critical on yourself than anyone else because, my God, you've helped so many people and you've helped me. So I know I'm my worst critic, and that's something that I'm working on. But the point I'm getting at is that I had all of these leftover residues from the old version of myself. And I went through this process and I gave it to Jesus, and he impressed it in his chest. And when I saw that in the spirit, I literally just bawled like a baby because he wasn't holding me bound to that version of myself. He saw me for who I really am in his eyes. And I just cried and cried and cried. And it was such a beautiful thing. And it was as if he was just saying, I've taken all that on. I've taken all of that on. But this is how I see you. And so when I came out of that entire process, I kind of taught that to the Unlocking Greatness community members. And I even taught them, one of the things I did is I got that sheet of paper and I went and I turned on the stove and I burned it. I literally burned it and let it burn completely up. And I said, goodbye. You're not that person anymore. And I just want to one last time say goodbye. I'm a new person. Everything about me is new. My messaging is new. The way I show up is new. I don't worry about what people think or say about me, right? There's a whole lot of things that's changed about me. Even my entire platform with focusing on leaders, right? Because God's given me a clear vision. I've called you to be a leader, and I've called you to help develop leaders. I've called you to help grow leaders. Help people see that seed that's inside of them and help them to discover who I am, help them to see that I've always been there for them, help them to see that even in every situation there's a seed inside of them that I've planted inside of them to grow. And so there's a lot that God has shown me that I've called you to represent me in every area. It's time for you to step up to the plate. So I literally went through almost like a birthing process. Now, you all know I'm pretty transparent with you and pretty vulnerable, but I pray that this helps you all, because this entire podcast episode is, I really want you to see your true value, your true self-worth, and step into the leadership role, which that's going to be my part 2 I'm going to talk about in just a minute. Step into the leadership role that God has ordained for you. It's time that we say goodbye to the old version of who we were. And we no longer are chained by the past, and we don't allow any decisions or anything that we've done in the past to hinder us or to hold us back. There's no need to walk around in any shame, any guilt, any embarrassment, any sadness, right? Or stressed about how things went or how you wanted it. It's all in the past. Last year is over now. It's over. Burn that list. That's what I did. And now focus on that new list. And let me just end this by saying, because I didn't just end there. Part of one of the things that you have to do, and you can, I'm not a psychiatrist, you guys can look this up. Pretty much every psychiatrist, psychologist, mindset coach I know have all consistently said the same thing. There's 2 primary ways that you can make major changes in your life. Normally it comes from some major emotional situation that happened, like a major impact that sort of forces change, right? Or the second way is you have to retrain your mind. You have to have repetition in your life. There has to be a repetitive action, repetition to train and have a new mindset. So the passage I want to read, and I didn't even get to the passage yet, is Romans 12:2. You all know it's one of my favorite passages. It says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So we read that passage, but what does that mean? What does being transformed mean? So you read your Bible, you pray, right? And you try to do good. You try to, think positive thoughts for a little bit, right? But then Without any healthy repetition in place, without any healthy routines, how do you continue that? And it's nearly impossible. And that's why, and this is what was so beautiful about what I had them do inside of the Unlocking Greatness community. I had them rewrite their finally statements. And that's something that you learn inside of the necessary retreat. You know, it's right in a finally statement of where you are praying and hoping that you're going. But rewrite their finally statement based on the opposites of all of the negativity that they had just written down. And it was so amazing to see the eyes open and people just like, my God, it's almost as if I'm believing what I wrote, that this can actually be my new version of me. And I encourage them. Some mindset coaches teach that you're supposed to read it to yourself or recite it like hundreds of times a day. I think that's a bit excessive. But I encourage them, at least put it in your phone, at least write it, right? So that every day throughout the day, you're reading it, you're going over it, and you're reminding yourself, this is the newer version of who I am. And something begins to happen as that paradigm begins to shift in your head. And paradigm is nothing more than a multitude of habits, by the way. But something begins to happen. Something begins to happen. And I won't go into much detail about that. But the subconscious mind, which is where all your feelings, that really is what controls your actions. That subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between what's true and what's not. And it literally begins to believe that you are that new version of yourself. So when you learn some of those things, and I'm just giving you guys a tiny little version of it, and then you look at a scripture that talks about being transformed by the renewing of your mind, it's almost like a light bulb goes off. And you're like, oh, I get it. I've got to be transformed even by the way that I'm thinking, by the way that I'm processing, by the things I'm even focusing on. I'm going to read this newer version of myself every single day and put this before God. Does that make sense? And then it makes sense. I'm going to end this, but let me just say this part, because you guys know I get excited when I get to talking about the Word of God. It's as if the Word of God comes alive. The more you begin to grow and understand the way your body works, the way your mind thinks, and the things that you need to do to make sure you have the right habits in place, the more I begin to see, oh my goodness, the scriptures have been saying this all along. So when you reread Psalm 1, I wasn't planning on turning there, but I'll turn to it really quickly. When you reread the book of Psalms, chapter 1, verse 1 through 3, and it talks about, blessed is the man who does not stand in the counsel of the wicked or sit in, let me just go to it really quickly. Hang on, I'm turning to it. But it talks about blessed is the man does not stand in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. Looking at verse 2, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. It's like, oh, I get it. It's not speaking specifically of paradigms and subconscious mind and all of that, but it's really speaking to exactly what every therapist, psychologist, coach that I know has been saying nowadays, that you have to have that repetition in place. So as you say goodbye to the old you, in this case, I'm saying goodbye to me, I have to be transformed by the way that I'm thinking. So listen to this. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. That's verse 2. He's like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. I used to have such a hard time with that verse, because I used to think that's impossible, that whatever you do prosper. That's almost like contradictory, like how is that possible? And then it began to dawn on me, oh my goodness, the Bible has been way ahead of us, way ahead of every coach, every philosopher, every psychologist, way, way ahead of us, because the Bible is clearly teaching us, oh, you mean that I get to be transformed by the way that I think? I get to meditate on the law of the Lord day and night. I get to see myself in a new light. I get to show up differently. I get to walk in faith, and now I have a good understanding of what that even looks like. Does that make sense? So that's why every single thing that this person does prospers, because they've already experienced it in the spirit first, and they're simply acting on it in the physical. Anyway, let me wrap this up, because you guys know I can keep going. It's reminding me of so many of my episodes I've done in the past. But anyway, I just want to end this by saying goodbye to the old me. I'm embracing transformation and growth, and I pray to God that you are as well. I am begging you to spend some time sitting in silence before God. And even if you don't want to conduct the exercise that I just mentioned, I know I gave you a tiny little version of it, right? Do something where you get yourself into the right environment so that you can begin to process that information, process who you are, how you show up, what you really believe about yourself, right? And present that to God and get the truth. And then put something in place, some type of repetitive action in place so that every day throughout the day, and by the way, I didn't mention this, I think it's extremely important to fast, extremely important. I won't even get into that. I'm involved in a number of fasts right now through a number of different groups, but get yourself in a situation where you can focus, right, on this newer version that you're becoming and have good repetition in place so that you can really train that mindset. This is the new person that I am. And watch how you're going to begin to show up differently. Watch how everything around you is going to show up. Because I've changed. A lot about me has changed, and I'm glad about that. But I love you all. I love you. I love you. It's time to say goodbye to the old version of yourself. It's time to heal from the old version of who you were. I love you all. Be encouraged. You're listening to Unlocking Greatness podcast with Zenja Glass.